This is quite an intriguing story, Stefan. The Times reporting that Arsenal want to push hard this summer to sign West Ham midfielder Declan Rice. First of all, that's a hammer to a gunner. Not exactly the most popular move, I think, among West Ham fans. How do you see the story?
Yeah, it's actually taken me by surprise, to be perfectly honest with you. Declan Rice has been heavily linked with a move to Chelsea for a number of years now. He was linked with a move to Manchester United as well. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Liverpool and Man City at some point. He's kind of been the darling of the English media for quite some time because of his performances for West Ham and because he plays a position that, just so many clubs desperately need players in. You can apply that to Jude Bellingham as well, who seems to be linked just about every club in the world because clubs always need central midfielders. But of course, Arsenal have been linked as well. I'm sure it's no coincidence that this has come about through Arsenal's kind of rise up the Premier League table. They recently beat Tottenham in the North London derby, whereas Man City lost to Man United, so that kind of extended their lead at the top of the table. And there's now kind of growing belief that they might actually go on and not only qualify for the Champions League next year, which is obviously a huge boost for the club to sign people and entice them to the club, but also to win the Premier League itself suggests that they are a couple of years ahead of schedule in terms of this kind of revamp under Mikel Arteta. And maybe that's why all of a sudden a club like Arsenal have become viable for a player like Declan Rice, who obviously is very ambitious, but also vice versa. They're now maybe thinking, well, if we are going to be in the top four, if we are potentially going to win the Premier League, we're going to have to start looking at bigger and better players. And the really interesting thing here for me as well is the fact that if you actually look at an Arsenal team, their midfield is probably where their real powerhouse is. Obviously Martin Odegaard's probably potentially their player of the season right now. He scored a great goal against Tottenham recently, but to have guys like Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka in there behind him have offered so much stability in that midfield. However, that midfield duo are not so much getting on in age. They're both only 29 and 30, if I'm not mistaken, and have long-term contracts, but now probably approaching a point in their career where Arsenal maybe have to start looking at long-term replacements over the course of the next 2 or 3 seasons. And of course, Declan Rice is a very young player. He knows the Premier League back to front, and he's also potentially the kind of player that Arsenal can maybe spend big on. And know that they'll be able to get their money back over the next 5-10 years. And the only one thing that keeps kind of ringing in the back of my mind here, which is my final point, I guess, is that I do wonder if everything that's happening at Chelsea this season has kind of rocked the boat in terms of Declan Rice's future. It felt like a shoo-in that he was going to end up at Stamford Bridge, but of course there's been a huge turnover, not only in players but in terms of the owner himself. Todd Bowley's obviously replaced Roman Abramovich, but of course the club's entire kind of recruitment staff have completely changed. New sporting director, everything. So it wouldn't surprise me if Chelsea have just completely ripped up the shortlist of players they hope to sign and have gone in a different direction, which now means Declan Rice is looking for another club to join. So maybe that's why he's been suddenly linked to Arsenal. But I think on paper, you can certainly see him fitting into that team, certainly as a long-term solution.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting here is, and you kind of mentioned it, right? Chelsea has been long linked with Declan Rice, and this goes back to, of course, him being a youth product at Chelsea before making the switch to the West Ham Academy. And I think this was always sort of an attempt for them to bring home a talent. Of course, they have targeted Enzo Fernandez in the winter, which spectacularly failed, which makes you sort of think that they maybe are looking for different targets. But Stefan, his market value is 80 million euros. His last update was in June. He has sort of stagnated in the 75 million to 80 million euro range. We would assume that is about the fee that West Ham could generate for him, considering that his contract is up in 2024.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, obviously the market values, we put a lot of value on them, literally, I guess, on the website. But I think they also do a really good indicator of showing where a player is in their career, whether they're moving upwards or downwards in that regard. And I think Declan Rice kind of hitting a plateau in that regard really goes some way to explaining why he probably has to move on from West Ham, why he has to maybe decide, right, if I want to become, say, a €100 million player, We now have 3 or 4 English players in that exclusive club. If he wants to make that step up, he has to move on from West Ham. Now, of course, as you and I know, and a lot of users don't actually know, we don't judge our market values based on contract lengths. So we're not suggesting that it's going to start plummeting next season. My Twitter mentions are full of people asking about player values despite their contract lengths. We don't do that. It's not part of the job. It's not part of the market value process, shall I say. So I'm not suggesting his market value is going to start plummeting if he goes into his final year at West Ham. But it does suggest, if West Ham are hoping to kind of cash in on him as this kind of golden egg, then this summer kind of has to be that opportunity to do that. And there was a lot of talk a couple of years ago about 120 million euros, 100 million euros. And I think it's quite telling that because there's maybe not that same, contest or battle between 2 or 3 clubs to sign him, maybe if Arsenal are the only club that quite reasonably can approach the table and make an offer, then his value might have actually dropped quite considerably to that kind of 70 or 80 million euro price tag, which, if you think about it and you think about the players that Arsenal have actually signed recently, isn't beyond their kind of spending bracket. Maybe wages is a different topic in terms of what Declan Rice would expect to earn at a top 4 club, or even a club who all of a sudden have become Premier League title contenders. But that kind of transfer fee, first and foremost, doesn't strike me as being outside of Arsenal's capacity. So on paper, I think he is quite an obtainable player for them this summer.
Yeah, very interesting to note that market values on Transfermarkt are always based on players having or imaginatively having a 3-year contract, right? So that's sort of the value we do. We do not deflate or inflate because of contract length. Finally, a Declan Rice linked to, rumor mill to Arsenal, Manchester City, Chelsea, Manchester United. You can check that out in our rumor mill. Go check out the page. There's lots of content on there, not just on Declan Rice. Stefan, this has been fun. We'll speak soon. We have lots of topics to discuss this week. Until then, cheers and bye-bye.